About 15 years or so ago, there was a documentary that came out about the state of public education in America called Waiting for Superman. Some of you might be familiar with it. It opens with a narrator saying these words: "One of the saddest days of my life was when my mother told me that Superman did not exist. I was a comic book reader, and I just loved Superman because even in the depths of the ghetto, you just thought, he's coming, and I don't know when, but he always shows up and he saves all the good people. I was reading, I don't know, maybe I was in the 4th grade. I said, Ma, do you think Superman is real? Superman is not real. I was like, he's not? What do you mean he's not? Nope, he's not real. She thought I was crying because it's like Santa Claus is not real. I was crying because there was no one coming with enough power to save us." The narrator gets a lot right there at the beginning of that documentary. We have a need to be saved. Things are messed up. Things are not the way they were supposed to be. And if someone is going to come save us, it's going to need to be somebody with a lot of power and a lot of authority, and someone who is going to use that power and authority for good and not evil. And luckily for us, someone much better than Superman has come. Jesus came. In Mark 5, 21 to 43, we're going to finish Mark 5 this morning. And we're going to see that there is nothing too difficult for Jesus. We've watched Mark develop the theme of Jesus' power and authority. We've seen him have the authority to teach, the authority to heal, the authority over demons. Even a legion of demons is no match for Jesus. We've seen him have the authority most profoundly to forgive sins, which only God can do. We've seen him have the authority over nature, calming the wind and the waves, which again, only God can do. And today he's going to conquer another one of humanity's greatest enemies. Outside of sin, our biggest problem is death. If Superman wants to bring somebody back from the dead, he's got to fly at super speed around the earth and turn back the earth's rotation and turn back time to be able to save somebody. Jesus just has to speak a word. He commands life to come forth from death, and it obeys. If you're able, please stand one more time. We're going to read our passage this morning, Mark 5, 21 to 43. If you have a Bible, you can also turn there, but it'll be on the screen for you. It says, "And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, 'My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live.' And he went with him. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment. For she said, 'If I touch even his garments, I will be made well.' And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, 'Who touched my garments?' And his disciples said to him, 'You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, "Who touched me?" And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease.' While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, 'Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?' But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, 'Do not fear, only believe.' And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, 'Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping.' And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, 'Talitha cumi,' which means, 'Little girl, I say to you, arise.' And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated, and please join me in prayer. Father, we come to you needy with problems, some of our own making and some not of our own making. Thank you that your mercies are new every morning, that we can trust to have a fresh start every day in your grace, where sin does not get the final word, but you do. So we ask that you would move through your word in us today, that you would free us from the shackles of sin, that you would give us a new perspective on our circumstances, and help us to trust you more than we did when we came in. And now I pray that the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts would be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Pray in Jesus' name, amen. I titled the message today, A Tale of Two Daughters. And for an outline, you can see we have daughter 1, and we see her problem in verses 21 to 24. And then we meet daughter 2 and see her problem in verses 24 to 26. And then the solution for her in verses 24 to 27, and the solution for daughter number 1 in verses 35 to 43. So what Mark has done, he often does, is he's weaving two stories together. And both of the situations feel hopeless. We've got desperate people. And the main idea of our passage is that there is always hope if you have faith in Jesus. There is always hope if you have faith in Jesus. The story begins with Jesus moving back to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. You might remember last week, he cast out the demons into the herd of pigs that immediately went down the hillside and were drowned, and the townspeople said, "We don't want you around here," and they chased Jesus off. So Jesus and the disciples got back in the boats, and they went back across to the other side. So we're back in Jewish territory, and as often happens, they're met with crowds. And it's amongst the crowds that are surrounding them that a man shows up named Jairus. He has come looking for Jesus because he has a great need. His daughter is not doing well, and he needs Jesus' help. We're told he's the ruler of the synagogue. 3 times, Mark says, the ruler of the synagogue. And we read about the rulers of the synagogue in other places, never with a whole lot of detail in the Bible. You can go look in some Jewish history and learn a little more. They were often very wealthy people. Sometimes they were Pharisees, but not always. Sometimes it was just a common person with means. They were highly respected, and they basically oversaw the local synagogue. They would take care of the building. They would run the services, organizing them, sometimes teaching at them, making sure that the scripture readings were lined up, all those kinds of things. So that's who Jairus was. Definitely a well-respected member of the Jewish community. We don't know if he was a Pharisee or not, but either way, he was high up in society. And this reminds us that Jesus does not discriminate. He is often portrayed as Jesus only comes for the oppressed, the poor, the needy, which he did, but he didn't just come for them. He also came for the well-to-do. He came for the powerful. It's about being poor in spirit. Anyone who is poor in spirit and will have faith in Jesus, that's who he came for. There's a lot of churches who have a kind of a come-as-you-are approach, and that part of it is exactly right. The problem is when we let people get comfortable like that and stay that way. Jesus says, all are welcome, come as you are, but I'm not going to let you stay that way. I'm not going to let you leave as you are. I'm going to change you. So it's not about getting yourself cleaned up and then coming to Jesus. That's not going to happen. It's okay to be a mess. It's okay to show up to church broken and sinful and feeling the weight of the week. When we think we need to clean ourselves up before we come, we end up not coming because we're not capable of cleaning ourselves up well enough. So Jesus says, yes, come as you are, but I love you too much to let you stay that way. So it doesn't matter if you're broke or rich. It doesn't matter if you're a diseased outcast or you're demon-possessed or you're a wealthy synagogue ruler. All are welcome to come to Jesus if you will come to him in faith. And that's exactly what we see with Jairus. The last time we came in contact with some Jewish religious leaders was in chapter 3, and we had a group of scribes that were accusing Jesus of being demon-possessed. We had a group of Pharisees that were plotting with the Herodians how to destroy Jesus. They wanted him dead. And so it's a surprise that Jairus shows up the way he does. When he comes, he falls at the feet of Jesus. So there's this level of respect and humility, submission and sincerity that he shows. And then he tells Jesus the problem. His daughter is on her last breaths. They have nowhere else to turn. So he needs Jesus. He needs help. She's not going to live much longer. So clearly he's heard about Jesus and all that Jesus has done for people. And so he makes the request to him, will you come to my house and lay your hands on my little girl so that she will be made well and live? And verse 24 simply says, and Jesus went with him. We know Jesus didn't need to go. Jesus is powerful enough to just say the word from right there and she will be healed. But he's not just a miracle dispenser. He goes with Jairus because he cares about people. And so they begin the walk to the house of the synagogue ruler. But we see the problem of his daughter. And now we're going to meet another daughter along the way. As they're walking to the house, the crowds are packed all around them as they're going. And we get introduced to a woman. She's not named in the story, but she's got some health issues. She's been bleeding for 12 years. Her situation is just as desperate as Jairus' daughter's. So she suffered under many physicians. You're not supposed to go to the doctor to suffer. You're supposed to go to the doctor to get made well. The opposite has happened. She has spent every last penny that she has on doctor after doctor after doctor, and she's worse off than when she started. So we have this other bleak, hopeless situation. And Mark keeps doing this, but we're faced with this unclean scene. Leviticus 15, it's not the most comfortable thing to talk about, but it lays out the cleanliness rules for menstrual impurity. A woman during her period is unclean for 7 days. She's got to go through a purification ritual, but for 7 days she's got to stay away from people and outside the camp. She can't go into worship, all of that kind of stuff. If that were to be an extended period of time, it didn't clear up as normal, then she would stay unclean throughout the duration of that. So this woman has been considered unclean for 12 years. She's not allowed contact with anyone. If anybody comes in contact with her, they become unclean. So they're trying to stay away from her. She is supposed to stay far away from them. In fact, if she were to go sit on a couch and somebody were to come sit on the couch without cleaning it first, they become unclean. She's not allowed to go in and worship with God's people. So for 12 years, this has been her life. She is like a leper. She's as good as dead, cut off from the community. So we feel this desperation from her. She's not even supposed to be around people, and yet here she is amongst the crowds because she has a plan to get healed. So we see her problem, and now we're going to see her solution. In verses 27 and 28, we're told that she's heard about Jesus. She's heard the reports. She's heard about the healings. She's heard about the miracles. And so she thinks to herself, if I can just get up to him and touch him, I'll get healed. I will be made well just if I can touch him. And so she sneaks up on him through the crowd, and she reaches out and touches his garment. And this is so out of bounds. She is not allowed to touch people. She's not allowed to be around people, and yet she chooses to expose the crowds to her uncleanness and Jesus. But it's portrayed as a picture of faith. Faith acts. Faith is not passive, it takes action. And this is why James tells us that faith without works is dead. She heard, she came, she touched, and she was healed. As soon as she touched Jesus, immediately she was healed. She could tell something changed in my body. The blood flow dried up. You must act on what you hear about Jesus. If you're here today and you're not a follower of Jesus, that's the task in front of you. What will you do as you hear about him? Will you turn to him in faith? That's exactly what she did. She had the faith to risk everything to go and touch him. And Jesus, maybe he felt the touch, maybe not, but he could sense power had left him. And so he turns around and he faces a giant crowd that's pressing on him from every direction. And he says, "Who touched my garments?" And the disciples, they just get annoyed. You can feel their annoyance. They're probably annoyed all the time because crowds are always following them around. They can't even eat sometimes. They can't get to where they're going. So they're probably tired of the crowds. And here they are, surrounded by the crowds again, and then Jesus says, "Who touched me?" You can feel their eyes rolling. They're like, "Everyone, Jesus, basically everyone in Capernaum has touched you. Look around. We're getting pressed on from every side. What do you mean, who touched me?" It's a silly question. The disciples are continuing to trend in the wrong direction in the story. Somehow, the more time they're with Jesus and the more they see him do, the less they believe, the less they understand. But Jesus ignores them completely. He's still scanning the crowd and trying to figure out who touched him. And so the woman shows up and reveals herself, and we're told she came in fear and trembling. And just like Jairus, she came and fell down before him. And it says she told him the whole truth. She's probably afraid because she's just exposed everybody to her uncleanness. She's doing things that were clear violations of the Old Testament law. There's probably also some fear that she's in the presence of somebody so powerful that she just touched him and was healed. And now she's worried that she's going to be called out for what she's done. So she falls down before Jesus and tells him her whole story. And Jesus responds in a remarkable kindness. First, he greets her as daughter. It's like she's been welcomed into the family of God. She is expecting a rebuke, but she does not get a rebuke. Instead, she is welcomed into his family. Now, she knows what she's just done. That's why she came in fear. But he's not worried about her making other people unclean. No, she's his daughter now. Banished for 12 years, flat broke and hopeless, now she's a member of God's family. And this happened by faith. Jesus said to her, "Your faith has made you well." You remember, she thought, even if I touch his garments, I will be made well. And Jesus says, that's exactly what happened. That word "made well" actually is just a word for saved. Daughter, your faith has saved you, is what he said to her. And in the context, clearly he's talking about the healing, physical nature, but I think more than that too. He did more than just cure her of a physical ailment. I think there was some spiritual salvation that took place as well. And so he sends her off. He says, "Go in peace, be healed of your disease," or literally, "be healed of your torment," is the word there. That's what's been going on in her life for 12 years. She's been tormented, and now she is free. I do want to encourage us that God does not always heal the physical ailment like he did to this woman. The point isn't that he will always heal you of your disease. You can ask Johnny Erickson Tada. You might be familiar, some of you, with her story. She was paralyzed in a diving accident as a young woman and became a quadriplegic and has lived many decades since in a wheelchair. She spent years praying for physical healing that never came. But even in those types of situations, as the main idea I stated earlier, when you hope in Jesus, or when you believe in Jesus, there's always hope. So her faith grew deeper and stronger. She started a global ministry to work with disabled people. She learned how to paint by holding a paintbrush in her teeth. You can see some of her artwork behind me. She has a deeper joy and love for Christ than ever before. So her faith might not have had the physical benefit that she had hoped for, but there have been rich spiritual benefits. Sometimes Jesus heals. Sometimes Jesus sustains you in your suffering. And in either case, he is worthy of our praise. He's worthy of our faith. Again, Jesus is not just a miracle dispenser. That's why he's on the way to Jairus' house already. Instead of just speaking the words over his daughter from afar. That's why he didn't just keep walking when the woman touched him. He didn't have to stop. Power went out. Okay, somebody got healed. We got a rush job here. We got a girl dying. No, he stopped because he cares about people. He wanted to know the story, the woman who touched him. He wanted to speak words of kindness and salvation and assurance over her. And just as Jesus is about much more than just meeting our needs, discipleship is about more than just having our needs met. It's about being in the presence of Jesus. It's about being known by him and loved by him And it's about trusting him and following him and acting on what you hear about Jesus. That's what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. She heard about him and she took action. So daughter number 2, her problem has been solved, but we can't forget about daughter number 1. I imagine the emotional roller coaster of Jairus. He's at home, his little daughter is sick and it's getting worse and worse, and he's helpless, and he's scared, and he gets desperate, and he hears Jesus is in town. So he's like, I got to go find Jesus. And so he heads out in that desperation, that fear. There's probably a little bit of hope mingled in there as he goes to find Jesus. And he picks his way through the crowd, and he gets to him, and he falls down before him, and he begs him, come help my daughter. And Jesus says, okay. And so he's like, all right. Jesus says, you lead the way. And Jairus is now excited, okay, there's hope. He's anticipating, my daughter's going to be all right. Help's coming. So they're all on their way to this house, and the crowds are following, and he probably has no idea that Jesus has just been touched. He's probably still walking, and he gets 20 or 30 feet ahead and realizes Jesus isn't with him. He turns around, what's going on? We're in a rush. Why is Jesus stopping? And Jesus is having this interaction with a woman. He hears her story, and he's lovingly speaking truth to her. And Jairus has got to be thinking, this is urgent. We've got to get back. He's antsy. It's like, we don't have time for this, Jesus. Thinking about the way Jesus acts here reminded me of Dr. Nakamura, who is my wife's OBGYN. He delivered both our boys. He's done, probably 3 or 4 different surgeries on my wife. And if you got an appointment scheduled with him in the afternoon, if it was at 1 o'clock, you can show up at 3, because you know he's not going to be anywhere close to the schedule he's supposed to be on. We would show up to that thing. I remember coming in. I was a math teacher at the time, and as soon as first time meeting him, he's already an hour behind schedule, and he stops, and he wants to get to know all about me, my job. He started, here, I got some riddles for you that you got to share with the kids. But it's because he cared about his patients. He didn't want to just physically take care of what was needed. He wanted to know people, and that's how Jesus is. But the next thing we know, this little interruption with the woman, it saved her life, and it's cost the life of Jairus' daughter. A group shows up from his house and delivers the terrible news. Your daughter is dead. And so now you can imagine Jairus, the grief that he was fearing is pouring over him like a wave. The group from his house, not really focused on compassion. Instead, they just follow up with a very practical question: why trouble the teacher any further? Clearly, they don't believe that there's anything that Jesus can do at this point. It's too late. Sorry, Jairus. Let Jesus get back to what he was doing. So our story has gone from your faith has made you well to your daughter is dead. Jesus hears that, pays no attention to it. He doesn't even address the contingent that came from the house. He just looks at Jairus and speaks to Jairus, who is now reeling. He needs to move off the reality of his daughter's death and refocus on Jesus, because there is still something that he can do. There's always hope if you believe in Jesus. So Jesus actually looks at him and gives him a command here. Do not fear, only believe. Mark just keeps banging the drum of fear versus faith. The greatest threat to Jairus in this moment is unbelief. It was doubt. It was looking at his circumstances and thinking that there's nothing that can be done. And Jesus says, put those fears aside and focus on me. Trust in me. It's the word of Jesus to all of us. Believe. There's a million things in the world to cause fear and doubt and anxiety in us, to have our hearts troubled. And Jesus has both the authority and the compassion to make things new, to make things right. He can heal you physically if he feels like it. He doesn't always answer that prayer, but he can. He can heal you emotionally and relationally if you're broken. He can heal us spiritually when we're dead. Jesus is in the business of resurrection. You just have to believe. So do you believe? Do you believe that the sin that you're entangled with, that you feel like you can't get free from, do you believe that Jesus can set you free? Don't let your belief be boxed in by the circumstances and the patterns in your life. With God, all things are possible. That word, believe, here is actually in the present tense, which means keep on believing. Don't stay in fear. Believe and keep on believing. And Jairus is facing the ultimate test because his daughter is dead, and dead people don't normally come back to life. This is not easy to believe. What Jesus has just asked him to do is very difficult. So Jesus leaves the crowds behind at this point, and they go to Jairus' house. And it's the scene that you would expect when you get there. A young girl's just died. People are weeping and wailing. They actually had a strange custom back in Jewish culture where there was a vocation where you would be a professional mourner. When someone died, it was standard to hire some of these people to come to your house to wail, to weep, to play the flute. Very strange. Doesn't make any sense to us, but there's probably a mixture of professional mourners and friends and family that are there at the house. And Jesus shows up and he's like, what's all the commotion about? She's not dead, she's just sleeping. Now, some people take that too far and think Jesus is being serious, but Jesus is telling them what he's about to do. And you can tell that they all know she's actually dead. You can see it in their response. They respond to Jesus with mockery. They just laugh at him, like, sleeping? You think we're idiots? She's dead. We know what dead people look like. Jesus he's left the crowds behind, and now he kicks everybody else out of the house. It's just down. Not even his disciples come in except for the inner circle. Peter, James, and John, and Jairus and his wife. That's it. And they go into where the daughter is. And again, with a touch and some words, Jesus does a miracle. He grabs the little girl by the hand and he says to her, Talitha kumi, an Aramaic phrase. Now, Mark doesn't assume that his readers are going to know Aramaic, so he translates it for us. And it's these little things in the Bible that they help us believe in the sufficiency of Scripture. The authors put into the text what we need to understand the passage. There's a temptation to go outside of the Bible to try to understand the Bible, where we end up using these non-biblical resources to interpret the text. And we don't want to ever do that. You'll see people try to reconstruct the customs of ancient Ephesus, and then that changes the meaning of the Bible when we're reading the book of Ephesians. That should never happen. The biblical authors have given us enough information in the text to understand the main idea of the text. And it doesn't mean that other stuff isn't interesting or helpful. I didn't know there were professional mourners in Jewish culture back then until I studied this week. That's not in the text, but it is not going to determine the meaning of the passage. It doesn't really matter. It's more just interesting. If none of them were professional mourners, it doesn't change the meaning at all. Don't use outside sources to determine the meaning of the Bible. So we get this Aramaic phrase, Talitha kumi, and then Mark explains it. He says, little girl, I say to you, arise. That's what it means. Jesus grabs the little girl, her dead, cold, stiff hand, and says, arise, little girl. And immediately she gets up. Jesus has the authority to raise the dead. Mark says that she's 12 years of age, tying her to the other daughter in the story who's been bleeding for 12 years. There's a connection there. The entire life of this little girl, that other woman has been functionally dead. And now her 12 short years have been cut off, and the little girl is dead. But the first daughter was given new life. I should say the second, because we're with the first daughter right now. And now the little girl has been given her life back. Jesus miraculously resurrects her. And the 5 people in the room besides them can't believe what they've just seen. This is always the response in Mark. They marvel, they're amazed, they're astonished, but it doesn't always lead to belief. Often the crowds will marvel at what Jesus does, and they will walk away in their unbelief and just wait until they might use Jesus again the next time he's around. The unclean woman is a model of faith. And then so is Jairus. Jairus needs to believe like her and act like her, and that's what he does. When Jesus looks at Jairus and says, don't focus on your circumstances, don't fear, just believe, he follows him. He does. He goes back to the house. He keeps taking steps of faith. And his faith takes action so that both of these daughters are made well. They're made whole. They're healed. They're saved. And then the craziest thing, Jesus looks at them and strictly charges them not to tell anyone. No one should know that this just happened. They've just had a house full of people that watched their daughter die. What are they supposed to do, hide her in a closet or something? How are you going to hide this? Of course they're going to know. Why would Jesus tell them not to tell anyone? I think people are not going to understand the resurrection power of Jesus until his own resurrection. They're not going to get it. Even if you go tell, they're not going to understand. Then he says, oh yeah, and get her something to eat. Yeah, as we all know, death really works up an appetite, so yeah, somebody check the pantry, see if we got some fruit snacks or some Ritz crackers or something, you know, she's awfully hungry here. No, why would the story end with that little phrase? Because she really rose from the dead. She is physically alive, and she still needs to eat like any physical person does. What do we do with this? Well, if you don't know Jesus this morning, if you're not a follower of Jesus, the answer is believe. That's what you do with this. Turn to Jesus in faith. Turn from your sin and turn to him in faith and be saved. That's what we want for you. That's why our church exists, so that people will come to know Jesus. But most of us already are followers of him. So what do? The main idea is that there's always hope if you believe. So what in your life is causing you doubt, is causing you fear, is causing you anxiety? What areas do you feel stuck and helpless, as if God doesn't have the power to set you free? Those are the things that you need to give to the Lord, to take steps of faith in action. Okay? If you are stuck in pornography, you don't just say, Lord, set me free, and then go clicking again. You take action too. Your faith has to work, but it's not going to be sustainable if it's you and your effort only. God needs to supply it. So beg him for help and then take action. Confess it. Find someone to confess it to publicly and get help. Take steps of faith. Whatever it is, whatever your fears are, give them over to the Lord and believe him. Believe that Jesus can set you free. Believe that Jesus can bring about the change in your life. He can do it. Jesus is not afraid of the messed up. He's not afraid of the unclean. I mean, even at the end here, don't forget, you're not supposed to touch dead people. This just continues to happen to Jesus. We're probably a little numb to it. The unclean make everybody else unclean, but not with Jesus. Over and over again. It doesn't matter if it's a leper or a woman with a discharge of blood or a dead little girl. Jesus touches them, and instead of becoming unclean, they become clean. And that's a big part of the point of the text today. Jesus takes the uncleanness that we bring to the table all the way to and including our death, and we come out on the other side of it clean and made new in Christ. 1 Thessalonians 4:13 and 14, it says, "But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep." And that's just a euphemism for death. "That you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep." This is our hope. As we come to the communion tables, this is our hope. Death doesn't get the final word because Jesus defeated death. He died and he rose again, so that those who are in Christ, who have trusted him and believed in him, even though they've died, we know they will rise again. We no longer have to fear death. Instead, we proclaim the death of Jesus until he comes back again. Jesus is better than Superman. The young boy crying because Superman wasn't coming to save him, contrast that with the little girl who was told to get up by someone who does have the power to save and who did show up. Jesus has no kryptonite. The devil, in his arrogance, thought he had won when he killed Jesus. But God writes stories so good that it's through death that he gets victory. That's why if you believe in Jesus, there is always hope.